You know, you have that artificial line that goes, that straight artificial, that looked like it was drawn by a ruler. Somebody with I don't mean a ruler like a king, I mean like a ruler like a ruler. It's just an artificial line that was drawn. You add that to this country, what a beautiful landmass, the most beautiful landmass anywhere in the world. And it was just cut off for whatever reason. It would be great.
Yeah, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Yeah, what a crock. That is Donald Trump, again, going on about this idea of Canada and being annexed, making it the 51st state. By the way, that line he refers to, that the border line he said drawn with a ruler, have you had a look at that line, by the way? It's not a straight line. There's some nice work right at the end on the eastern part of it, too. So I have no idea what he's talking about. But, of course, the fact of the matter is he continues to talk about it. Now, we have discussed this a lot on this show with our political commentators, a variety of different people. I thought we'd try to get an American perspective on this because there's something really interesting actually in this article. Not that we'll ever know exactly why he's doing this, but Martine Powers, who's a reporter for the Washington Post and the senior host of Post Reports, which is their flagship daily news podcast, is on the line. Hi, Martine.
Hi, Aaron.
So let me begin by asking, you allude to a couple of things in here. A couple of them I'd not heard before as we all try to figure out why he's obsessed with this idea of Canada as the 51st state. And you mentioned off the top about this developer in Toronto. Can you explain what the Trump Tower thing was all about there?
Yeah, so there used to be two Trump hotels in Canada, one in Toronto, as you said, one in Vancouver, and both of them ended up closing down, and the sense was after the fact that it's because the Trump brand, especially during his first term in office, that brand became kind of toxic, and Canadians didn't really want to stay there anymore. And so not only did the hotels close down, there were litigation around them, and investors at this hotel in Toronto ended up suing Trump and the Trump organization. And so there has been this sense, which I want to be clear that the White House has denied, but that there's this sense here in the States that, maybe that's the origin of Trump's animosity to Canada or his desire to kind of exact some form of revenge in Canada. And so that's one of several theories that we looked into and trying to figure out, when and why did Trump become so fascinated with this idea of making Canada part of the U.S.?
With respect to those two hotel projects, which both shut down, I think it might be worth mentioning as well, given that we're talking about Donald Trump, his name was removed from those projects, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because the thought was that the name was why the hotels weren't successful.
So the suggestion is that maybe that's one of the reasons it's revenge. That's why he's upset. And by the way, with respect to the lawsuits brought, I know that's private. We've never actually found out how much he had to pay, if anything, to settle those lawsuits, I guess, right?
Yeah, at least from the reporting that I've done,
all right, so
the terms of any settlements were private.
That's our first guess, although, maybe it's as valid or invalid as any of the other ones. The one we like here the best is, and a few people have brought this up, there's a wonderful picture of Mrs. Trump. Yeah, Melania looking at Justin Trudeau, giving him that, wow, aren't you a good-looking young man, on a tarmac somewhere. And people, have suggested that maybe Donald didn't take very kindly to the fact that his wife was making eyes at our prime minister.
Well, it's funny because this was a meme that I feel like was circulating a lot on the internet, back in 2019, I think it was. And so it's interesting that it's kind of resurfaced now. And I want to be clear that I think a lot of it is just a depth perception issue. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that Melania Trump was, trying to do anything untoward to Prime Minister Trudeau in that moment. But it's wrapped up in this greater sense, which I'm sure you and your listeners know better than me, that there has been this sense for the past 8 years that Trump and Trudeau don't like each other, and Trump has called Trudeau weak and has had kind of insulting things to say about him. And I think the sense is that Trudeau doesn't like Trump either. And whether, they're not great relationship with each other writ large, or it's, you pointed out people on the internet saying maybe Trump was jealous of his wife looking at Trudeau in this photo, that might be the origin of when Trump decided.
Well, that's maybe as valid as anything else, right? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, a lot of guesswork. And I do want to, I feel like I have to point out here that we also asked about the Trudeau relationship to the White House. And they said absolutely not the basis for this is a policy idea for Trump, this 51st state thing.
You also, though, in the article, and I found this interesting, I had John Bolton on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I said, during your first term, did this ever come up? And his answer was a clear, no, it didn't. But in your article, you mentioned that, but then you mentioned that Gerald Butts, who basically served as Justin Trudeau's right hand for a long, long time, he had said this had come up.
Well, yeah, he said, and we didn't talk to him in an interview, but he said in a recent social media post that this came up, quote unquote, a lot in some of the previous interactions with Trudeau. But it's hard to tell, like, was that in a more serious manner or was that just a joke? And I mean, as we all know, this has kind of escalated over the recent months, and really since last year, from being a joke to something a little bit more serious. And so the sense is that maybe it did come up in interactions with members of the Canadian government during Trump's first term, but I don't think anyone had the impression back then that this was anything that Trump was seriously pursuing, and that he wasn't talking about it in a way that anyone, took it to mean anything other than kind of a ribbing that maybe wasn't appreciated at the time. But I think, at least from looking at Trump's statements out loud, what he's been saying on social media, there really is an escalation between November and the election last year till now of the way that Trump talks about this being not just, oh, haha, Governor Trudeau, like clearly he's just trying to, get one in on Trudeau, but that it's, that the detail with which he's talking about this and his, the case that he's making for why this is going to be so good for Canadians, that has really started to shift.
I will point out, by the way, I think anyway, it was after Trump had been elected, Justin Trudeau became the first G7 leader to actually go to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald Trump. And to me, that really began this whole governor of Canada, annexing Canada. And I think Trump has, in essence, said that at that meeting when they were sitting having dinner together, he said, if we, if we tariff you and it's going to be thousands or billions of dollars that you have to pay. He asked Trudeau about that, and Trudeau said, well, we'd be a failed nation if that happened, or something to that effect. And since that point, he's just doubled down every opportunity he gets. He's still doing the Governor Trudeau thing, although he's no longer the prime minister. And he does not seem to have changed his opinion or the rhetoric over Canada as a 51st state. Did anybody in the administration that you spoke with have any idea where he got this notion from?
No, I mean, a couple of the other theories that we raise in this, Peter Navarro, who's a senior trade advisor for Trump, he has been, apparently, according to our reporting, kind of leading the charge on some of the trade war policy ideas. And so the thought was like, okay, if he's saying to Trump, like, look, this is a moment for aggressive tariffs against Canada, we need to show them that we mean business. Like, maybe he's also the one who is the source of the 51st state idea, but the White House denied that. And also Kevin O'Leary, I don't know if are you familiar with him, a Shark Tank?
I'm afraid we are, yes.
Okay, so I'm not a Shark Tank fan, so I this is kind of newer to me. But he's someone who's in Trump's orbit who apparently has been, really vocal about this idea that there could be closer ties between the U.S. and Canada, either economically, in terms of currency, in terms of immigration policy. So, like, those are the two guesses I've heard from people in the administration. But honestly, you talk to other members of the administration, you talk to Trump allies, you talk to people in the Republican Party. Like, there's not a big crew of Americans who are like, yes, this is a great idea, and we think that, like, invading or annexing Canada is, makes sense as American policy. Like, that's what's so confusing about this, is that Trump is kind of out on a limb here, and this isn't a thing that people who voted for Trump were advocating for. It's not a thing that you're hearing from Americans now of like, yeah, maybe we should be pushing harder on this idea. It just seems like very much of Trump's own mind and like true just to his own personal interests and not like the wider kind of demands or concerns that he's hearing raised by his voters.
Just as a final question, Martine, do you get the sense that Americans in general care or are even up to date or know much about this idea?
I think Americans are confused. I think they care about the trade war from the perspective of like what it's going to mean for prices here. And you've seen a lot of even, politically conservative business owners here starting to raise concerns about like what a trade war would do for us here. But when it comes to this 51st state idea, I mean, I think that a lot of Americans just see it as kind of funny, which I know, might not be particularly heartening to hear as a Canadian, but it's just so confusing. I mean, I think, I do think that like across the political spectrum, Americans generally see Canadians as like our relatively nice neighbors to the north, and that people don't have a ton of beef with Canadians in this way. And so I think trying to understand where Trump is coming from and how, is he like persuading to more Americans to look at Canada with some kind of antagonism? I mean, that's a question that I have going forward. Like, is this having an effect in terms of how regular Americans view our relationship with Canada?
Well, let's certainly hope not. Martine, I want to thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Take care. Martine Powers, Washington Post reporter, on trying to figure out why Donald Trump is fixated with this Canada 51st state idea.